Hey, it's Brad, Blue Nile Farm. Today we're going to try to take off this cover off of Pequa. It's basically a double rotary rake, but I know a lot of other brands like Krone, they have a similar issue. And if you need to change the gears or do anything internally, this thing is a real pain to get off and is really tough. We put 6 hours on this already and things only budged maybe 1/4 of an inch. So with that said, stay tuned and we'll kind of show you how we're dealing with this issue because you may have the same problem. So the reason why I'm taking the cover off this rake is the fact that when we're going through the hay field, this actual section, because it's a double rotary, this one section, as it turns, what would happen is as soon as it came in contact with hay, the gears would skip and it wouldn't be able to have enough force to push it off. So to check the gears, we actually have to take the cover off to check the two gears where they mesh. And one of the gears is exactly as large as the top cover. The other one is just a small gear, and I'm going to show you what they look like here in a minute. The other issue is that I was going through Hay Kings, and I referenced this to my opening, and an individual posted on Hay Kings off of Facebook, which is basically a group that deals with hay production. A guy was having a problem with a Krone for having this exact same problem. So I'm going to assume that regardless of what type of rotary rake you have, there's always some type of cover, whether it's a single or a double, that houses all your gears. And I'm assuming that this cover should just come right off, but I'm assuming they're probably really hard to get off and people have a lot of problems with this. So that's why I'm making this video. So hopefully this will help somebody down the line. We're going to show you basically the 3 methods that we use to eventually get this thing apart. And hopefully, again, this will help somebody. So just to show you the 2 gears that we're looking at that I think are at fault. One is this gear here. This obviously is like a PTO shaft, and it's part that actually goes in, and this is the first gear. And we believe this one is the one that's stuck on the part of the cover right in here. It sits like so. And this gear goes inside. And this one we believe is faulty, but because you have to take the cover off to check the other one, this is the other one. So to check both of them, to make sure they're working, we have to take the cover off to evaluate both, because you may be able to just slide this in and it may work, but to truly do it properly, you're probably better off to take the cover off. And that's kind of what we were doing. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and maybe it was a waste of time, but it's just something that we had to do. So this just gives you an idea of what I'm looking for once we take the cover off. So for this first section of the rake, you actually have a shaft that comes up out of the middle. And that shaft contains the cover, which is this. This cover is laid on top of the shaft. It's held in by a key. And then that cover is held on top by threaded collar that goes on the shaft. And this, you're going to need a pipe wrench to take off. So if this comes off easily and you're able to pry the cover off with the key on and it all comes off easy, then life is easy. It's the perfect system. But unfortunately, with moisture, rust, and over time, they're probably both going to be stuck. So we had to apply heat to the collar. And because this collar is relatively large, and at the time, and I'm kind of a rookie mechanic, and the guy that helps me out, Jeremiah, is a mechanic. But fortunately, I had a set of oxygen acetylene tanks, and we use that with a number 2 tip, and we use that to heat. But that's not good enough. And the best thing you need to do is have a Rosebud. And a Rosebud that I had to go purchase to apply the heat necessary to get these things off. This came off without the Rosebud, but you definitely may need a Rosebud if this stuff is really stuck. So this is a Rosebud, for those that don't know, and it goes on your oxygen acetylene tank setup, and it basically applies a lot of heat and can actually heat up a large area. And that's what we used to try to take this thing off. And I'm going to show you our first method, because obviously prying it, we did apply heat and we're able to pry enough of this plate off. And what you can see is on this plate is you only have so much room to actually catch it. So we came up with an idea to try to lift this off by applying pressure using a 20-ton bottle jack. and I'll show you what we did with that. And we were somewhat successful, but came to a point where it just wouldn't budge any farther. And I'm going to kind of show you somewhat of what we did. So this bottle jack is not a 20-ton bottle jack. It was just here just to give you an idea. So what we did is we took the collar off, and we basically used a bottle jack that we set on top of the shaft itself on the base. And then what we did was take a set of ratchet ties that actually had hooks in them, and we set them over and caught the edges of the cover. And then underneath that, over that was basically a set of forks that were on the tractor, and that allowed the bottle jack something to press up on, and it also allowed us, by pressing on it, to kind of use the straps to kind of compress them to pull this off while we were applying heat with the Rosebud. So that's going to be something you're going to watch here in a second, and you'll see some of the pitfalls that occurred while we were doing this. If that thing was freed up, it should have came off because there was a lot of pressure to it. But if this works for you, this will give you at least an idea of what we did, and maybe that'll work in your favor. Jeremiah is going to be using the Rosebud, applying the heat to this thing, get it nice and hot, and hopefully this thing will break free. Yeah, last time that Rosebud wasn't putting out enough heat, and now with the right mixture assembly, made a huge difference. Last time, when we first started, we didn't have a Rosebud, so we weren't able to get enough heat to this. But you definitely need to have a Rosebud, something to put a lot of heat to get this thing off, because these things were really tight. We did it again. There's another one shut up to the trusses. Crazy. So that method of using the strap and the tractor with the forks didn't work for us. And we tried everything we could, but I think that key that was holding that plate in was really tight. And 4 times we tried it. One time the strap actually broke, and the other times the strap actually shot up, went up and wrapped around the rafters like I depicted in the video. So I thought that was kind of funny because there was a lot of pressure behind it, and every time it shot up there, it got stuck. So I thought that was kind of hilarious. But anyway, that leads us to our last method, and that's called cutting it out with a torch. So there's a plate, brand new, and that's what it looks like when it's flipped over. And this is actually the gear that we're replacing with the teeth. And that's pretty much how it's going to be setting in here. And you could see that there's really it's really tight in here. So when we were trying to put those hooks in, if we would slip in a little bit and catch this gear, we're fighting getting this off. So because of that problem, since we don't have a special tool to really catch these edges, the best thing we're going to do is cut it. So we're going to be cutting. And we're going to be using a double odd tip, and hopefully she'll come right off that way. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut around the outside so we can cut the actual shaft without cutting the actual pin. Almost every rotary mower has the same problems. They're set up exactly the same way. So depending if you have a Krone or another brand, they may be real similar. So I'm going to take you through the method of how we did this cutting with the torch. And basically we cut this thing up into 3 different pieces. And here are several of the pieces here. And we went around the shaft and left this core. Now I want to make you very aware that, you know, when this thing is in operation, there's grease zerks on here, and a lot of grease is here on that inside this plate. So when you're actually cutting this, you're going to have grease fires taking place while you're cutting. Also, as you cut this apart, be aware that your slag is also going to build up, and it's not a clean cut like it would if it was just a piece of steel. So you're going to have that as an issue too. So I broke it up in 3 pieces, and we left this collar. I cut around the shaft just to get this off. And then once these were off, we kind of cut across with the torches trying to break this off, and Jeremiah was able to kind of pound this off and loosen this from the key, and also getting these pieces apart using a sledgehammer. So with that said, watch the video. We'll show you what we did, and you'll see some of the grease fires and things that we were dealing with, not in its entirety, but give you kind of the short of it. But this was the most successful way of doing it, was cutting it with the torch, and it will save you a lot of time. And don't be afraid of doing it, because it really wasn't that bad. I'm a rookie at cutting, and I was able to do it, so I'm sure you can too. You know, just like any other farm, you know, you get tools, and you know, the more equipment you have, the more you have to screw around with this kind of stuff. And I'm kind of glad that I had the oxygen acetylene torch set up, because I was able to do this type of work. So, but anyway, stay tuned, and hopefully you'll kind of understand the hazards. Also, make sure though, if you're going to have these fires, you might want to have a fire extinguisher handy, or a blanket or something to snuff out this fire if it gets out of control. That's just my word of warning before you get started, because this grease will catch on fire, and it doesn't cut as clean, and you just need to be aware of that. Try that. Oh, that thing's even still on there. So we've been torching and wound up cutting this plate off because there's no way the thing was coming out. So far we're cutting it out in chunks and hopefully we can expose it, but we do have a new plate. And then once we get that plate off, hopefully we can get this part around the shaft. That's going to be our next little joy. But torching it seemed like our only option at this point because it would not come out the other way. So we got it down to 2 sections off, and now we're just popping off the last piece. If she'll come off. There she is. So right now we took off every part of the plate except for the shaft area. So that thing's still there. We had a lot of burning grease. It is one messy job, but you know, we were down to a point where there's no way this thing was going to get lifted off. So all we now to do is get that shaft part off and then see where we have. But a lot of burning grease. I'm not going to say this is the best way, but considering our situation, I think this is the best way. So we wound up torching around that centerpiece, and we got that on. You can see the key sitting there. So we want to finally getting it torched and try to cut on both sides without going too deep, and we've finally been able to pry it off with a big crowbar. So here you have a big mess of burnt grease, and the collar's off from the plate, but it's all done and everything's off. It just needs to be cleaned up, sprayed off, and that was the best and easiest and fastest way we got this thing off, was cutting it. It still took at least an hour and a half, 2 hours, but it's done. So guys, this is what the gear looks like after we power wash it. Now we have something to work with, and we're going to take it apart and go from here. But this video is really designed just to show you how we took off the cover. That gear cover was a real pain, and a lot of it has to do with that key being in so deep. If I would do it over again, I wouldn't even mess around. I would just cut this thing off and be done with it. That's probably the easiest thing I can tell you. But again, you also incur a cost because you have to buy a gear cover. But sometimes it's the only option. So with that said, hopefully this video helps somebody out there, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.